Hello friends, and welcome back to our Fast API tutorial. In this tutorial, part 29, there are not many left I think, there's maybe a handful of videos left, but in this tutorial we're going to touch on relational databases. So this is going to be a little bit of a longer video, and there's a lot more complexity in it. So what I'm going to end up doing is I'm not going to use main.py, which I've kind of commented out, and I'll minimize this for a second. I'm instead going to just create a new Python package, and we'll call it SQL app. And I will add that. Okay, now, hold on one second. Okay, sorry, I just want to make sure the sound was coming in the right place. So now what we're going to do, you can see we have an init.py file, which is empty, but that declares that we have a package. And let's just close all this up for now. And that's what we get by creating a package in PyCharm. So now we're going to create a couple more files, and I'm just going to create them all right now. We're going to create CRUD.py, and we will add it. We're going to create database.py, and we will add that as well. We are going to create main.py. We are going to create models.py, and we are going to create schemas. Schemas, let's do schemas. Nope, go back here for a second. Schemas, refactor. Okay. Now, there's another thing that we need to install, and we're going to, I'll just pull it up right here, SQL Alchemy pip. Just in case you're wondering, there's information right up here. I will just add in, let's just copy this. It's just easy. Terminal. Oh, there we go. Okay, now let's install SQL Alchemy, and while we're waiting for that, we will go into database.py. Okay, there we go. So I will add SQL Alchemy to the requirements.txt. There we go. That's good. Now let's go into database.py. So we're going to import a few things from SQL Alchemy. From SQL Alchemy, we're going to import create engine. From SQL alchemy.ext.declarative, we're going to import declarative base. And from SQL alchemy.orm, import session maker. Okay. Now we are going to create a variable, SQL alchemy database URL equals, and we'll just say SQLite /SQL app.db. I'm going to put a commented database URL just in case SQL alchemy database URL equals PostgreSQL user password at postgresserver/db, just in case you want to use Postgres and you want to set it up. It's very, very similar. It's just SQLite is just easier to use on this. I don't have to worry about, you know, spinning up a Docker container or anything like that. Next, we are going to create an engine. Engine equals, hold on one second. Create engine, SQL Alchemy database URL, connect args equals check same thread false. And this connect args thing there is just for SQLite. You wouldn't need it if you're using Postgres. And then we are going to create a session local variable equals session maker, auto commit equals false, auto flush equals false, and we're going to bind it to the engine that we've just created. Okay. Now, sorry about that little back and forth of that side panel opening up. So the session local is going to just be a database session. So this is not a database session, but when we actually call it, then it will be that actual instance of that class will be a database session. And then there's just one other thing we need to create: base equals declarative base. Now this we're going to import from this file into our models file, and this is what will allow the database to update. Okay, and I will show you that right now. Let's open up models. From SQL Alchemy, we're going to import Boolean, column, foreign key, integer, and string. And from SQLAlchemy.orm import relationship. Now we're also going to, from .database, import base. Now we're going to set up a user, and I need to add one more line here. User base, and we're going to declare a table name. Table name equals users. And let's set up our fields. So ID equals column, and I'll just do all of these for now like this. Email equals column, hashed password equals column, is active equals column, and then items equals relationship, item, back populates equals owner. Okay, and I will explain what these mean in just a second. Next, let's create a class item, which inherits from base. Table name is going to be items. And again, ID equals column, title equals column, description equals column, owner ID equals column, and owner equals relationship with user. Back populates equals items. So what we're going to do here, so each of these values in our class, if you will, each of these properties in our class will be a column in the database. That's exactly why it's being called, column here. So let's go ahead and set this to be an integer. We want this one to be a primary key, and we want it to set up an index. For email, this is going to be a string. We want it to be unique, and this will also be an index. We want to be able to search either by ID or by email. Next, hash password is just going to be a string, nothing else. This is going to be a Boolean, and default equals true. So by default, anytime a new user is created, they are immediately declared as active. I will do something similar here. Integer, primary key equals true, index equals true. This is going to be a string. Index equals true. This is also going to be a string. Index equals true. And the index equals true is really just for anything that you want to be able to search the database on. And then here, this is going to be an integer, and we're going to say it's a foreign key, which will go to users.id. And don't worry about the relationship just yet. We'll kind of see how that comes into play in a little bit. So don't worry too much about what's going on here. But you can kind of see the relationship, right? Like items for this user, items is going to have a relationship to the item class, and it will back populate this owner element here. What this is effectively doing is it's creating I don't know if it's a many-to-many relationship if you're familiar with Django, or if it's a one-to-many. I think we would also need to add in a foreign key relationship. I don't remember if it's many-to-many or one-to-many, just off the top of my head. Okay, so next, what we're going to do, let's create some schemas. From Pydantic, import base model. Class item base model. Title is going to be a string. This we've seen before, so this should be nothing new. description string or none equals none. And then class item create will inherit from item base. And we just want those same two fields. Class item will inherit from item base. And now we're going to have ID as an integer. Owner ID is an integer. And we're also going to create a config class. And we're going to set ORM mode equals true. Okay, and I will explain a little bit about what this is. Let's just set up the user models as well. Class user base will inherit from base model. Email is a string, and that's it. That's all we want. Class user create will inherit from user base, but now what we want is password is going to be a string. Now, we don't want, so user, which is what I'll set up here, and I will describe it as I'm going. Class user inherits from user base. ID is an int. Is active is a boolean. Items will be a list of item, which by default is going to be an empty list. And class config ORM mode equals true. Okay, so if we just look at the user, for example, when you create a user is going to register. They're going to need to have an email and a password. But if you're returning or storing a user in your database, you don't want to store the password. Or if you're returning a user as a, as a return for, the response model that we touched on in a much earlier video, you're not going to want the password to be part of the response model. Okay, so you're not going to include that. Next, let's talk about ORM mode. So there's a config class, and I will copy the link and I will paste it right here, that allows us to set certain parameters on a given Pydantic model. This is not a Fast API specific thing. This is for Pydantic. What we end up being able to do when we use it in Fast API and Pydantic is it will try and read the data possibly as a dictionary, possibly as not a dictionary. So if you're trying to fetch data, and this is just a generic Python thing, let's say A equals data key A, right? So that's how you would grab an item from a dictionary. You can also do it as A equals data dot key A. So it allows you to treat it as this specific type, if that makes sense. What it will also do is it will eagerly fetch data in a relationship setup. So if we look at something like this, for example, so if you're going to want to end up getting items, so if you are fetching a user, say user equals Bob, and then we want, no, not user equals Bob. I'm not going to even try and speculate on this. We're going to touch on it. But like if you wanted to do, if we had a given user and we wanted to fetch the items, well, the way SQL Alchemy works is it won't actually hit the database until you access this specific element here. So if you, for example, return a SQL Alchemy model from the path operation, so if we use this as our response model, it's not going to include the relationship data just using generic SQL Alchemy. What if we include ORM mode equals true, what will happen is it will, when it goes to fetch this user, it will also fetch the related items so that if you're using it as your response model, you'll actually get data. Otherwise, you're not going to get any data for the relationship that we have right there. So we'll kind of leave that as it is. It's going to be a lot easier to see this as your as we use it, if you will. Next, we're going to go into CRUD.py. From SQLAlchemy.orm import session. And then we're going to also import models and schemas. Okay, so now what we're going to do, we're going to create some methods to get the user and get the user by email and multiple users, create user, the whole 9 yards. So let's go ahead, def get user. DB is going to be of session type, and user ID is going to be an integer. So this is just fetching one user. So now we're going to just return db.query models.user.filter models.user.id equals user ID first. So what's happening here, why is this yelling at me? I don't know why it's yelling at me. Whatever, we'll see. So what's happening here, we're getting our DB, and if we go to SQL Alchemy query, you can see we have the query API here, session.query, and you're going to be querying a class, and then you want to pass in this filter. We want the user.id field to equal the user ID, and then we're just going to grab the first item. Now if we want to get user by email, DB session, email is a string. This is going to be fairly similar. Return db.query models.user, filter models.user.email equals email first. And it's going to yell at me again. I don't know why. And now let's get multiple users. DB is going to be a session, and we want to include some sort of pagination here, so we'll do skip int equals 0, limit int equals 100. And this is just going to return db.query models.user. So this is just going to get all users in our database. Well, if we do all, that will get all users in our database. So what we're going to do instead, offset skip. So let's say we're gonna start at user 20, and then limit. Okay. Let's see. So we've got those 3 methods. Let's go into here. Can I do black on this entire directory? Probably. I'm sure I can do it in the command line, but it's just, there we go. Okay. Next, we're going to set up something to create a user. Def create user. DB session user schemas user create. And I'm going to pass for now, because let's just set up one more to just fetch our items, because they're, we have that model as well. Def get items, DB session, skip int equals 0, limit int equals 100, and then we're just going to return all of our items. Return db.query models.item, offset by skip, limit by limit, all. And there are ways that you can abstract this functionality out. Like you can have one get things method, and then you can just pass in either models.user or models.item if you want to include pagination and you want it to be the same sort of thing. For this, since we're only doing this for 2 things, there's really not a need to abstract that out, but you can. And then we're also going to create user item, DB session, item, schemas, item create, and user ID is going to be an int, and we'll pass. So this is fairly straightforward for querying the database. Now what we need to do is we need to actually, we're going to be instantiating an object, adding it to the database, and committing. So first thing we need to do is create a hashed password. Fake hashed password equals user.password plus, we'll say, not really hashed. It's a fake hashed password, of course. Now, our DB user is going to be, we need to create a user instance from our model. with email equals user.email and hashed password equals fake hashed password. So let's just go back to our user model. So this is the user model in the database. This is not the user model in our schema. Two separate things, okay? Now, what's happening is we are passing in a user create object. So in our docs that we're going to see, the user create object, let me go back to schemas, user create will have an email and a password. So we're going to have to pass those things in. It's going to take that user create object. It's first going to hash the password, then it's going to create a user, it's going to grab the user email, and we're going to create that user object. Now all we need to do is db.add db user. That's not it though. You can go through the SQL Alchemy docs to kind of see a little bit more about how to do this sort of thing. I'm just going to kind of keep powering through because we're already at 21 minutes and we're not quite close to done. Next, we're going to have to commit these changes to the database. And then we want to refresh the DB user. So by committing, we've created an instance we've created a database instance for the table. By doing db commit, what actually happens is we're saving that instance to the database. So we've kind of created the object, but we've not, committed it to the database. So by doing db commit, it creates the primary key, it creates the ID value, but we don't actually have that until we call db.refresh. That will add the ID to that. It will add the ID to that db user instance. And then similarly, we're going to do something for create user item. db item equals models.item, item.dict, and owner ID equals user ID. So item dict, if we just look at this, we have item create is just our title and description. If we go back into models, our item has a title and description. We have an ID that we don't have to worry about. The database will set it. And then we have an owner ID field. So again, item create has title and description. And then what we're doing here is we're just grabbing the user ID, which is the owner, and we're associating it with this new item. Then again, db.add, db item, db.commit, and then db.refresh, db item. And we will return db item. Okay, so that's our CRUD functionality. Okay. Let's see. What do I want to do next? We have, I think, a lot of things that we need, but we don't actually have an app yet. So let's just look at this for a second. We have CRUD, we have database, we have models, we have schemas. We don't have an app. So let's create an app. From fast API, import depends, fast API, HTTP exception. From SQLAlchemy.orm, import session. And then from import CRUD models schemas. And then from database, we're going to import session local and engine. So now, what we're going to do is we're going to write a line in here that will actually update our database. Metadata.create all bind equals engine. So what will happen, since we're using the declarative base on all of our models that we have, this here is going to go into here. It's going to pretty much go and look for any model that has this base that we've set up, this declarative base, and it's going to update those models as necessary, or it's going to update the tables as necessary. Okay. Next, we need to actually somehow get our database. So if we look at the CRUD functionality that we have, we see that this has to be a database session, but we don't, we're passing it in, right? There's been no instantiation of a database session. So we need to somehow create that. So if we go back in here, we're going to def get db, db equals session local, and here's where we instantiate it. Now we have a database session. Try yield db, finally db.close. Okay. This is, so I kind of skipped over the functionality of dependencies with yield because it would have needed to, it would have required setting up a database and everything like that. There's not really, you can check the documentation. I wouldn't worry too much about what this is. If you want a database, this is how you get it. You're going to have to use this getDB function. It yields the created database, and then once you're done doing whatever you need to do, it closes the session. Okay, now we're going to create some routes here, but first things first, this right here is not really I don't want to say it's not a preferred way to go, but I mean, we're using SQLite. This is a little test app that we're building. What you're ultimately going to want to end up doing is using something like Alembic. It's a little frustrating. If you're used to Django, there's going to be almost nothing that's as good as their automated database migrations. Like just being able to run Python manage.py, make migrations, and then migrate is about as easy as it gets. That said, Alembic does make things relatively easy, and I had someone comment on, I think on the very first video in this series not too long ago, about some ideas for projects. I think what I'm going to do after this series is over, I'm going to do a series where I do like a full user management. Users can sign up, you get email notifications, you get login and stuff like that. I mean, that's kind of the sort of thing that you need on a lot of apps, and I know there are libraries out there, but I'm gonna, I think, probably do something from scratch about that to just kind of show you. But okay, let's just move on for now because we're now at 27 minutes. App.post. So we're going to create a user. Users. Response model equals schemas.user. Def create user. Schemas.user create will be our user, and db, which is a session, will depend on get db. Okay, now first, db user equals CRUD.getUser by email. db email equals user.email. So you might be wondering why we're doing this. Oh, there's one other thing that I forgot to include. App equals fast API. There we go. So we're doing this because we first want to check if db user, then we want to raise an exception because that user already exists. Status code equals 400, detail equals email already registered. Otherwise, return CRUD.create user, db, and let's just be explicit here, equals db, user equals db, oh no, it's just user. Okay. So let's go back to CRUD very quickly. Our create user, it creates a hashed password, and then it creates that user in the database, and it returns the newly created user. If you want to, you can do status code equals, what is it, 201 I think is for created. Let's just do that, see if it works. Now app.get users. So this is going to be for all users. Response model equals a list of schemas.user. And then we're going to do def read users. Skip int equals 0. Limit int equals 100. These are going to be query parameters. db session equals depends on get db. And then users equals CRUD.get users, db, skip equals skip, limit equals limit. Okay. Oh my goodness. Return users. Next, let's see. Let's clean this up a little bit. You notice it's not actually running right now. It's just not working yet. Okay, but we're going to keep on going. App.get. Now we're going to get an individual user. Users, user ID, response model equals schemas.user, def read user, user ID is an int, db session equals depends get db. Now, db user equals CRUD.get user, db user ID equals user ID. Wait a second. Get user. There we go. If db user is none, so if the user is not found, say we pass in a bad ID, raise HTTP exception, status code equals 404, detail equals user not found. Otherwise, we just want to return the user. Return db user. So now let's just look at this for a second. So we're getting a user from the database. The database itself has, like the table that we have in our models, includes the hashed password. We don't want to return that. So let's just double check to make sure because we're calling this db user, so it could be a little confusing. We're saying it's a user schema that we're returning here. Let's just see if it, yeah, it's not actually checking it right now. But like, we would want this to, actually, let me do this. Schemas.user or HTTP exception. No, let's just schemas.user. And let's do user create and see if it yells at me. Yeah, it's not yelling at me yet. I just wasn't sure if my type checking would tell me that, hey, this is not a schemas.user create. So let's just go ahead and look at get user. So again, we're doing a query on models.user, which is the actual model. And then we're filtering, getting the user ID, and getting the first entry from it. It's in ORM mode, schemas.user. Okay, we're good. The schemas.user is ID is active in items. Okay, we're good. We're good, we're good, we're good. And it's also got email in here. Moving on. App.post, we're going to create a new item. Users, user ID, items. Response model equals schemas.item. Status code equals 201. Def create item for user. User ID int item schemas dot item create. We're just saying here these are the things we're going to be passing in. DB is going to be a session which depends on get DB. Return, this is going to be a simple one, CRUD.create user item, DB, item equals item, user ID equals user ID. We've already built the functionality for this. We're just kind of pulling it in now. So remember, this is a primitive, not a primitive type. I don't remember exactly what type, what we should be calling this. This is a path parameter because we've just declared it up here. If we didn't declare this up here, like this, then it's a query parameter. Okay, but since we're doing it like that, it's a path parameter. And then this is going to be a body object because it is a derivative of the base model. Schemas. Item create comes from item base, which itself comes from base model. And since we're doing that, it is then going to be part of our request body that's going to come in. Next, app.get items. response model equals list of schemas dot item. And then def read items, skip int equals 0, limit int equals 100, and then we need to pass in the database. Depends on get db. Items equals CRUD dot get items, db, skip equals skip, limit equals limit. Return items. Okay, we're good. We're good. We've got everything here. Let's clean it up a bit. Okay, I need to pause it for just a second because my brain needs a break. Okay, I'm back. I also needed just a drink of water for a second. Okay, so I think we're good to go. This, I'm pretty sure we're all set up. So now what we want to do is we want to run our app. So let's see, clear. There we go. Unicorn SQL app.main app reload, because again we're not in the general directory of main. We're running this separate SQL app. Okay, so now let's see if it works. No module named SQL app. Okay, pausing again while I try and fix this. Huh. I wonder if I hit the pause button or if it was just continuing to record while I was trying to figure that out. I guess I'm going to have to check after this. I know what's going on here. This is in the Fast API front end, or at least I think I know what's going on. Let's back out, clear. Now we're in our main Fast API tutorial location. Unicorn SQL app, main app, reload. Okay, good. Run. Fantastic. Now we've got this. So let's look at a couple of things. First things first. Let's add a new data source. So I'm using PyCharm, and it has this built into it. Let's see. Okay, there we go. Fast API SQL Lite DB. The file is. Oh my goodness, I don't want that. This is going to be a pain. Not Python virtual env. YouTube? Let's see. Fast API tutorial, SQL app. Oh, it's at the top level. SQL app.db. Download? I don't know. Let's see. Test connection. Hey, it works. Okay. It's introspecting the database. Let's close this up. Main. Tables. We have items. I don't know why I just double clicked it to open. You can see we have for our columns ID, title, description, owner ID. We have for our columns here type, name, table name. That's the master. We don't care about that. I'm sorry, this is a long video. I shouldn't have looked at that one. For users, we have ID, email, hash password is active. So there we go. So this works. Now, just as a note, in the documentation, they indicate, or I should say, Sebastian indicates that you can use any kind of GUI that you want to interact with the database. He ends up recommending or calling upon SQLitebrowser.org. You can go ahead and download this if you want to. That's fine. If you've got some other sort of local thing, you can do that as well. So we've got this. Let's go ahead and, which one is this? This is owner ID. I don't want items. Let's close this. Let's open up our database right here. I'm just going to open up users. Minimize this. Let's create a user. Nope, that's not the way we do it. Create user. Try it out. email string, password string. Fine, it doesn't really matter. Execute. ID is 1, is active, no items. Email is string. We refresh our page here. String not really hashed. So we have created a user. Now let's go ahead and we'll read the users. Try it out, hit execute, and we get our users, which is just the one that we've created. Let's close this up. Let's create an item. The ID value that we have here is 1. So our user ID is 1. We will create an item with title string, description string. Hit execute. We get a 201. ID is 1, owner ID is 1. And if we go down to here and we get our items, try it out, we should have one item that we've just created with the ID of 1, owner ID 1. Let's open this up for a second. Items. And you can see ID is 1, string is 1. And you're going to want to, like for this sort of stuff, you're going to want, some validation. Like string is not a valid email. So you're going to want to, use some sort of, whether it's Pydantic validation or whether it's your own validation, things like that. But this is just a very basic introduction to using a database, a SQL Alchemy database. And you don't have to use SQL Alchemy. You can use, let's see, I think Tortoise is one. It's another ORM that you can use for Fast API. This kind of, I think, tries to mimic Django, Django's interface a little bit. If you want to use NoSQL, you can. I was playing around with Beanie for a little bit, which was not bad. I was building an app where I was trying to use a NoSQL that seemed to make sense, and the only issue was trying to set up custom indexes, like partial text search indexes, was just a pain, and I just ended up going back to Django because it was just much simpler. But yeah, so this is kind of the general introduction to handling relational databases. The next thing that we're going to touch on is kind of related to what we've just done. You can see here we have multiple files in this little mini app. So we're going to kind of expand on this and see how we can have multiple files for like bigger applications and things like that. So, okay, like I said, I know this was a long video, but I hope you made it through this far. If you did, I'm not gonna say what everyone else says yet. This is my first tutorial series. I'm gonna wait till the next one before I start saying what every other YouTube says at the end of their video. I'll see you later.